The transmission arrived in the middle of the night. The galactic Concorde rarely sent messages to backwater planets, let alone one as unpredictable as Earth. Yet, here it was, a summons, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. The message played across every device on the planet, from smartphones to billboards, in a synthesized voice both emotionless and precise. To the leaders of Earth, the Supreme Concorde of galactic civilizations extends an invitation to negotiations regarding humanity's role in the interstellar community. A delegation must be sent within one planetary rotation. The consequences of refusal are not advised. That was all. No explanation. No details. Just an abrupt demand wrapped in the guise of diplomacy. The message ended as suddenly as it had begun, leaving billions of humans staring at their devices, hearts pounding with curiosity, excitement, and an undercurrent of dread. The world had waited for this moment. Some had feared it. Some had dreamed of it. Now, it was real. Within hours, the United Nations convened in an emergency session. Heads of state, military generals, and scientists gathered in a room that felt far too small for the weight of the moment. Arguments erupted before the session even properly began. Some demanded an immediate show of force, preparing Earth's defenses in case the aliens posed a threat. Others urged diplomacy, desperate to avoid an interstellar war before they even understood the stakes. In the end, the decision fell to a delegation, a handful of representatives chosen not for their political affiliations or military rank but for their ability to navigate the unknown. Among them was Dr. Evelyn Carter, a linguist with a knack for deciphering extraterrestrial communications, Captain Thomas Raines, a veteran with years of experience in crisis response, and, to everyone's surprise, Javier Ortiz, a middle school teacher from New Mexico, known for his ability to diffuse conflicts with nothing but patience and an ever-present cup of coffee. The delegation boarded the Concorde's transport ship, a sleek, obsidian vessel that appeared to warp space itself around its form. As the engines hummed to life, the humans felt their stomachs twist in ways they couldn't quite describe. It wasn't just acceleration. It was something else entirely. And then, they were there. The Supreme Concorde station was unlike anything they had imagined. A vast, floating construct orbiting a sun of violet light, its architecture defied human comprehension. Towers twisted into fractal patterns, and corridors shifted as though the station itself was alive, adapting to the needs of its inhabitants. And the inhabitants, dozens of species, each more bizarre than the last. Some slithered, others hovered, a few flickered in and out of visible reality. They were escorted by a being that called itself Viarethes, a creature of shifting plates and iridescent tendrils. It communicated not with words but through a series of pulses that Dr. Carter, with some effort, translated into a rough approximation of speech. Humans. You are unexpected. The delegation was led into a massive chamber, where the Supreme Concorde waited. Seated on platforms that adjusted their height to create an illusion of equality, the representatives of countless civilizations studied the newcomers with cautious curiosity. The negotiation began with a single question from the Concorde's presiding figure, an entity composed of liquid silver strands that reformed with every movement. What is humanity's greatest strength? Dr. Carter exchanged a glance with Captain Raines. This was it, the moment that would define Earth's place in the universe. The military had instructed them to answer with strength, to highlight human resilience, adaptability, or strategic brilliance. But before she could respond, Javier Ortiz stepped forward. His voice was calm, measured, and utterly sincere. Kindness. The room fell silent. Not the silence of contemplation, but the silence of disbelief. Whispers, pulses, and hisses of alien languages filled the chamber as the Concorde deliberated. Finally, Viarethes spoke. Elaborate. Javier did what he did best, he told a story. He spoke of how humanity had survived its darkest moments not through conquest, but through compassion. He told them of the countless acts of selflessness that defined Earth's history, disasters where strangers risked their lives for one another, moments where enemies became allies, conflicts resolved with words instead of weapons. Strength isn't just power, he said. It's knowing when not to use it. It's knowing when to listen, when to help, when to understand. That's what makes us dangerous. We change things, not by force, but by kindness. The Supreme Concord listened. The room, filled with beings who had seen entire civilizations rise and fall, sat in stunned silence. Then, the laughter began. It started as a whisper, a clicking sound from one of the Concord's members, then spread like a contagion. Hissing chuckles, trilling giggles, and deep, rumbling amusement echoed through the chamber. The very walls seemed to shake with mirth. Viarethes regarded Javier with something that could almost be admiration. We expected threats. Declarations of power. Promises of war. But this is new. The Concord's presiding figure leaned forward, its silver form shifting. Very well. Humanity will have its place among us. But be warned, kindness is not a weapon often used in this galaxy. It may make you powerful. Or it may make you a target. Javier simply smiled, offering the Supreme Concord a warm, human nod. Then I guess we'll just have to show you how it's done. And with that, the fate of Earth was sealed, not with war, not with threats, but with kindness. The Supreme Concord's decision sent shockwaves through the galactic community. News of humanity's acceptance spread across the known universe, eliciting reactions ranging from curiosity to outright disbelief. The notion that kindness could be a force as formidable as military might or technological supremacy was something few species had ever considered. Back on Earth, reactions were equally divided. Some hailed Javier Ortiz as a hero, a man whose simple words had secured humanity's future. Others condemned the decision as naive, believing the Concorde had merely humored them. Government leaders scrambled to decipher the full implications of the agreement. Was Earth now under protection? Were they expected to prove their philosophy? Was this an invitation to galactic politics or a subtle trap? Meanwhile, on the Supreme Concord station, the human delegation was given quarters, an entire wing retrofitted to accommodate their biology. It was a surreal experience. Walls adjusted their texture for comfort, food stations offered unfamiliar yet strangely palatable options, and the very air composition shifted slightly to mimic Earth's atmosphere. Despite the hospitality, there was an undercurrent of tension. Their presence had disrupted the status quo, and that was never without consequences. It didn't take long for the first challenge to present itself. Viarethes, their primary liaison, arrived unannounced. Its form, a shifting construct of iridescent plates and coiling tendrils, exuded an air of controlled curiosity. Humans, your presence has stirred complications. Captain Thomas Raines, ever the pragmatist, crossed his arms. Let me guess. Someone doesn't like us being here. Many someones, Viarethes confirmed. There are those who consider kindness a weakness. They seek to test your claim in ways that may not be diplomatic. Dr. Evelyn Carter sighed. I assume this means trouble. Viarethes's tendrils coiled tighter. A challenge has been issued. The Draxian Coalition, one of the more militant factions within the Concorde, demands a demonstration of your strength. They believe your philosophy is an elaborate ruse. Javier Ortiz frowned. Strength? You mean, like, a fight? Viarethes pulsed. That is their language. And they expect you to answer. The delegation exchanged uneasy glances. This was exactly what they had hoped to avoid, a test of might against a species bred for war. The Draxians were legendary for their martial prowess, their culture steeped in centuries of conquest and battle. Against them, humanity seemed laughably unprepared. We don't do war, Javier finally said. Not like they do. But if they want to test us, we'll find a way to answer. Viarethes tilted its head. And how do you propose to meet this challenge without violence? Javier smiled. By being exactly who we are. The arena was vast, a colossal amphitheater carved into the heart of the station, where conflicts were settled before an audience of thousands. The Draxians had assembled in force, rows upon rows of hulking warriors clad in battle armor, their slit-pupiled eyes gleaming with anticipation. The challenge had been framed as a trial by ordeal, a test to expose the folly of the human claim. And yet, when the human delegation stepped onto the arena floor, they brought no weapons. No armor. No aggression. Instead, they carried a table, a set of chairs, and a steaming pot of coffee. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. The Draxian champion, A towering brute named Corvash stomped forward. "What is this? Where are your weapons?" Javier gestured to the table. "Sit. Let's talk." Laughter erupted from the stands, a mixture of amusement and disdain. Corvash growled. "You mock us. The challenge is battle." "This is our battle," Javier countered. "You want to test our strength? Fine. Sit. Drink. Listen." Corvash hesitated. This was unprecedented. He had expected a fight, bloodshed, a display of might. But this was something else entirely. A trap. A joke. Or perhaps, a different kind of test. With narrowed eyes, he lowered himself onto the chair, his massive form making the human furniture look comically small. Javier poured a cup of coffee and slid it toward him. "Try it." Corvash sniffed the liquid, skeptical. Around them, the audience murmured in anticipation. Finally, with a grunt, he lifted the cup and took a sip. Silence. Then, a slow blink. A twitch of the jaw. A thoughtful hum. "It's bitter." Javier nodded. "Like war. But keep drinking. It gets better." Corvash took another sip. Then another. His expression shifted from suspicion to something resembling intrigue. The tension in the arena changed. The Draxians were warriors, yes, but they also respected cunning, strategy, and above all, victory. And here, in the simplest of ways, the humans had won. Corvash exhaled sharply, setting down the cup. "You fight differently than we do." Javier leaned back, smiling. "We fight to understand. That's our strength." For a long moment, Corvash studied him. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, he stood. "The challenge is met. The humans are worthy." The audience erupted, not in rage, but in something far more unexpected: approval. The demonstration had not been of physical strength, but of will, of patience, of an approach to conflict unlike any they had seen before. And in that, humanity had proven itself. Viarethes, watching from the sidelines, pulsed with something that might have been amusement. "You continue to surprise, humans." Javier grinned. "Get used to it. We're just getting started." But as the delegation celebrated their unconventional victory, unseen forces stirred. Not all within the Concord welcomed this disruption. In the shadows, enemies whispered. Humanity had won this battle. But the real war was just beginning. The victory in the arena had cemented humanity's place within the Supreme Concord, but it had also drawn unwanted attention. Not every species within the Interstellar Council was amused by Earth's unconventional methods. Some saw it as a threat, a disruption to centuries of carefully maintained order. Others saw it as an opportunity. And some, like the Obolari Dominion, saw it as an insult that could not be tolerated. The Obolari were an ancient empire, their history soaked in conquest and intimidation. Unlike the Draxians, who respected strength in all forms, the Obolari valued only domination. To them, humanity's acceptance into the Concord was an aberration. An affront that needed correction. The message came just days after the arena event. A formal declaration delivered in a cold, clinical tone, its words as precise as they were ominous. Humanity's ideals are an infection. You mistake survival for kindness. We will show you the difference. Prepare. The Concord erupted into a flurry of debates and emergency sessions. Many species urged action, insisting that humanity be protected, that the Obolari could not be allowed to act unchecked. Others saw it as an unfortunate but necessary trial, humanity's true test of survival. Captain Thomas Raines, ever the pragmatist, understood the stakes all too well. "This isn't a fight we can talk our way out of," he said, pacing the quarters assigned to them. "They're not here to test us. They're here to break us." Dr. Evelyn Carter exhaled sharply. "Then what do we do? If we refuse to meet them, we look weak. If we fight, we play into their hands." Javier Ortiz sipped his coffee, unfazed. "So we don't fight. Not in the way they expect." The others turned to him, waiting. "We've already shown them that we don't play by their rules. Why start now? We need to remind them what makes us dangerous." The Obolari arrived in full force. A fleet of jagged warships, their hulls etched with the scars of 1,000 conquests. They did not hide their intent. They were here to issue a challenge, to force humanity into submission. The Supreme Concord, bound by its own regulations, could do nothing but observe. The terms were clear: humanity would send its greatest warrior to stand against an Obolari champion. A trial of absolute combat. No negotiations. No diplomacy. A fight to the death. And so, under the gaze of the galaxy, humanity sent Javier Ortiz. The Obolari did not laugh. They did not sneer. They simply watched with cold, reptilian eyes as the unarmed human stepped onto the arena floor, a simple folding chair in one hand, and a fresh thermos of coffee in the other. The Obolari champion loomed before him, 9 feet of muscle and armored plating, wielding a blade that shimmered with energy. The silence was deafening. Javier took his seat. Slowly, deliberately, he poured a cup of coffee and took a sip. Then, he placed another cup on the ground between them and looked up at the towering warrior. "You thirsty?" The Obolari hesitated. For a brief moment, confusion cracked the veneer of their unshakable dominance. The arena, filled with thousands, was utterly still. Javier leaned forward, his expression calm. "This isn't about strength. It's about control. You want to prove you're better than us? Fine. But not with a weapon. You win if I lose my cool. I win if you lose yours." The Obolari champion's grip tightened on the weapon. This was absurd. This was insulting. And yet, walking away would mean conceding, admitting that a mere human had dictated the rules of the engagement. Javier took another sip of coffee and gestured to the empty cup. "Go ahead. Take a seat. Or, prove me right." A low growl rumbled in the Obolari's chest. His eyes darted to the Concord officials, to his own people, to the silent masses watching with bated breath. This was supposed to be a display of superiority. Instead, it was becoming a test of restraint. And restraint was not something the Obolari were known for. The moment stretched. The Obolari champion's muscles tensed. His blade hummed with power. The audience leaned in. The air itself felt poised on a knife's edge. Then, with a roar of frustration, the Obolari lunged. Javier didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He simply lifted his cup, took another sip, and watched as the champion stopped mere inches from his face. A heartbeat passed. Then another. The warrior's massive frame trembled with the effort of restraint. His breathing was ragged, his posture rigid. But he did not strike. Because to do so would mean losing. Javier smiled. "See? Told you." The arena erupted. Not in cheers. Not in jeers. But in stunned, reverent silence. Javier Ortiz had won without lifting a finger. The Obolari champion staggered back, shaking with barely contained fury. But there was nothing to be done. The trial was over. The rules had been set, and humanity had prevailed. The Supreme Concord stood as one, acknowledging what had just occurred. This was not just a victory. This was a shift in the very nature of power itself. Vierethis, observing from the sidelines, pulsed with something that could almost be called awe. "You continue to defy logic, humans." Javier stood, stretching. "Yeah, we get that a lot." But even as humanity celebrated, shadows loomed. The Obolari Dominion did not take humiliation lightly. And in the depths of the galactic stage, unseen forces conspired to ensure that this would not be the end. No. The real war had only just begun. The echoes of the arena battle reverberated across the Supreme Concord, rippling through the galaxy like a stone cast into a still pond. The Obolari Dominion, humiliated and enraged, withdrew from the station, their silence more foreboding than any declaration of war. The other species watched, waiting for the inevitable retaliation. Humanity had won the trial, but they had also painted a target on their backs. Captain Thomas Raines leaned against the wall of their quarters, arms crossed. "They'll come back. You know that, right?" Dr. Evelyn Carter nodded, tapping away at her tablet. "Undoubtedly. But now, they know they can't break us the way they expected. That's something." Javier Ortiz, ever the optimist, poured himself another cup of coffee. "It's everything. They wanted to prove us weak, and instead, they proved that we fight in a way they can't counter. Viarethes arrived then, its luminous form shifting with what could only be described as intrigue. You have created a dilemma for the Obolari. Their entire foundation is built on force. And yet, in the face of humanity, they could not wield it without losing. So what now? Rains asked, watching the alien carefully. Viarethes pulsed. The Obolari have only two choices. To acknowledge that strength is more than conquest or to attempt a final, desperate act of domination. The Supreme Concord has already issued warnings that any action against humanity will be considered a violation of the Accords. Carter arched a brow. And do you think they'll listen? No. Viarethes's form flickered. But they will hesitate. And hesitation is where change begins. Days passed, then weeks. The universe did not erupt into war. There were no surprise attacks, no sudden retribution. Instead, something far stranger happened. The Obolari sent an envoy. The arrival of their representative sent shockwaves through the Concord. The Obolari did not negotiate. They did not send diplomats. And yet, here stood an armored figure before the human delegation, his imposing frame marked with the insignia of the Dominion. I am Corvash, he rumbled, his voice thick with controlled fury. And I am here to learn. Javier smirked, setting down his coffee cup. Well then, Corvash. Have a seat. The Obolari warrior hesitated for only a moment before he lowered himself into a chair, his massive form making the furniture creak under the strain. It was an image that would be broadcast across the galaxy, a moment that would be studied for generations. The moment when the mightiest warriors of the galaxy admitted, for the first time, that there was another way. Months later, back on Earth, humanity's presence in the Supreme Concord was no longer a question of acceptance, but of influence. They were not the strongest. They were not the most advanced. But they were something else entirely, something the galaxy had never seen before. The ability to wield power without violence. The ability to break an enemy without lifting a weapon. The ability to change the course of history with nothing more than patience and understanding. A new era had begun. As Javier stood on the balcony of the Concord Central Station, looking out at the countless stars beyond, Rains joined him, exhaling deeply. Think they'll ever get it? Javier grinned, raising his coffee cup in a silent toast to the vast unknown. Give it time. Kindness is the longest game there is. The moral of the story was simple: true strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the courage to build. And humanity, flawed as it was, had given the galaxy something it had never truly seen before: hope.